5.
There's a bunch of very, very evil men who have played the race card brilliantly against our useful idiots.
4.
There are some good people in public life who are brave, courageous, and do the right thing.
3.
What a shyster he is, anyway. His popularity ratings, you can hear them plummeting past your ear.
2.
There's been a lot of people in power that have been involved in this, and not just in Rotherham, but all the way across the UK as well. This is Britain's dirty dog secret.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Stop the world, co-pilot. I want to get off. In fact, we're off already, aren't we? Because we're on Planet Normal, looking down on the madness of planet Earth. And what a world it currently is. Conflict between Israel and Iran is escalating, causing yet more death, displacement and destruction across the Middle East amidst relentless missile and airstrike exchanges. And along with the terrible human fallout, there's economic damage too, as a spiking oil price threatens to reverse a fragile global recovery. As Tehran threatens to close the Straits of Hormuz, a critical route out of the Gulf for 25% of daily global oil flows, the economic outlook is overcast as geopolitical storm clouds brew. We'll be discussing that, Allison, plus news that women will no longer be prosecuted in the UK for aborting their own pregnancies at any point up to birth. MPs have voted for that with a huge majority of 242. But much of this Planet Normal voyage will focus on Baroness Louise Casey's newly published audit into the child rape scandal, exposing systematic failures in addressing ghastly sexual exploitation of minors in England and Wales, by no means exclusively but disproportionately on the available data by Pakistani men. And you're bringing us a special extended interview on this subject. Baroness Casey recommended a statutory national inquiry forcing Keir Starmer's Labour Party into a long overdue U-turn, alongside new laws and police operations to protect victims and pursue offenders. A truly grisly episode in the UK's history, Allison. But are the authorities finally starting to respond in an appropriate way? Judging by your piece in Wednesday's Telegraph, link in the show notes to this episode, you don't think so.
I have been really engrossed this week, co-pilot, in domestic affairs. So I'm just squinting at one eye at Iran. So I'm basically relying on you to tell me if World War III breaks out. Can you just give me a 5-minute warning?
I certainly will.
Need to get my little survivor's package ready. I'm actually rather cheered. I know you said it was all gloom and doom, and I know we're not going to have any oil, but Iran has been such a menace to the world, hasn't it? I mean, it was the funder of 7th of October, Hamas, Hezbollah, bad hats in Syria. Iran has just, destabilised and poured poison through the world. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the Israelis will be able to oust the Ayatollahs, and particularly, as we've discussed before, Liam, for the sake of Iranian women, because about every other week I get some horrible, horrible email. So let's hope that they are soon liberated. And I'm hearing from lots of citizens, ordinary people in Iran who are cheering the Israelis on. So it's not always what it looks like on the news. But yeah, closer to home, more young women who've been in dire straits. And we've had rarely a week goes by without a Keir Starmer U-turn, does it? I mean, strange is the week when there isn't the smell of burning rubber as the Prime Minister.
2-child benefit cap, gone. Welfare savings, gone.
Winter fuel.
Refusal to have a national inquiry into the child rape scandal, gone.
Well, listeners will remember that, of course, back in January, Sir Keir was dead against, said it was not only was it totally unnecessary to have a national inquiry into the worst scandal in British history, anyone who agreed with it was jumping on a bandwagon of the far right. And you had all these ministers like Jess Phillips, Angela Rayner, absolutely shameful women who are supposed to have been supporting these girls.
I was harangued by Fiona Bruce on Question Time for suggesting we need national inquiry, and also for suggesting that Elon Musk had a point in pushing for one as well.
I was so well, I'm always proud of you, but I was especially proud of you with that. And also, really, Elon Musk, I think he kicked this all off, didn't he? He caused such a stir, drawing global attention to this horrifying scandal, which shames our country. But yes, so Starmer asked Baroness Louise Casey to do a review, and I think he must have been praying that she'd come back and say, you know, nothing to see here. In fact, I was quite hopeful, Liam, when I saw that Louise Casey had been chosen, because I had, you know, I've been very, very steeped in this topic for a really long time and writing about it for about 13, 14 years. And there was a Louise Casey report originally, in an earlier report in 2015, where she was absolutely scathing about public institutions that she said had ignored, even condoned regressive, divisive, harmful cultural and religious practices for fear of being branded racist or Islamophobic, and focusing on, you know, the notorious first thing, really, the first case of the Rotherham child abuse scandal. She then concluded, I mean, this is 10 years ago, that it was a catastrophic example of authorities turning a blind eye to harm in order to avoid the need to confront a particular community. So as I hope, Liam, Louise Casey came up trumps, has given the Labour government no choice now. Really, This is a very devastating indictment. Councils, police, senior bureaucrats covered up horrific evidence about these Pakistani origin rape gangs for, of course, fear of appearing racist and Islamophobic.
Can we just take a moment, co-pilot, just to a Planet Normal chapeau to Baroness Louise Casey, because she's an example of, if you put the right person in charge of the right inquiry, you may actually get an outcome that is in the public interest. Of course, she did her report into the Rotherham child sex scandal in 2015, but she also did the Metropolitan Police Review, of course, after the murder of Sarah Everard, which was also not backward in coming forward in terms of conclusions that were a bit awkward for the authorities. And now this grooming gangs audit as well. So good on her. There are some good people in public life who are brave, courageous, and do the right thing.
And tell the truth in what is an arena and a subject where very little truth has been told. So lots of interesting things have been thrown up by this. You know, we've seen the Prime Minister nobly coming forward to take the brickbats. No, I'm just joking. He's off to Canada, hiding in the G7.
He is.
Leaving little Yvette.
And he dodged the abortion vote as well. Very well timed, Prime Minister.
Yeah, he's what a shyster he is. Anyway, he's a popularity ratings. You can hear them plummeting past your ear. A few questions for me, Liam, from this report. Yes, now they've committed to having a national inquiry into the rape gangs. I'm very concerned. There are rumours already that they're going to be exempting possibly, you know, Whitehall, councils, senior police. This is absolutely not what's got to happen, right? We cannot have another COVID inquiry with a sort of bovine Justice Hallett sitting there just nodding through a prearranged conclusion. Everyone's got to be under scrutiny for this, because as well as the original perpetrators, who of course absolutely vile and protected because, you know, members of a minority community that, you know, people didn't want to incite racism against them. So they really had a license to, you know, feast on these vulnerable young white girls, a total inversion of racism, which I think, Liam, was based on anti-white racism and was based on social class, because you can bet your bottom dollar that if it had been sort of Charlotte's and Isabella's, there'd have been much more of an outcry than because it was Jade's and Kaylee's. So the one thing I'm concerned about now is the scope of this inquiry, which mustn't just be 5 towns Labour's chosen because there aren't many rape gangs in them, which is what they were hoping to get away with. We've also got this absolutely astonishing admission from Yvette Cooper. Can you believe this in our country, that foreign criminals and asylum seekers who have been arrested on rape gang charges, which are still going through the legal system, are still allowed to claim asylum?
Yeah.
Let's let that hang there, Liam.
Yeah.
Absolutely astonishing. And coming back to one of your sort of favourite observations. I think what's remarkable really is discussion of this topic has been suppressed basically by liberal media and bien pensant intelligentsia, and they're now all rapidly rewriting their social media stuff and saying, oh yes, the rape gangs were always terrible. But what I've noticed this past week, I've always called them the Pakistani child rape gangs. I refuse to call them Asian grooming gangs because it's not a bloody dog parlour. It's the horrific abuse and torture of young pubescent girls. And what we are seeing now, suddenly on the front pages, is use of very, very clear language about this particular group of men who have been massively disproportionately, as you said at the top, represented in these crimes, and who I think have enjoyed a protected status because nobody wants to stir up hatred against a particular minority. But there is a bunch of very, very evil men who have played the race card brilliantly against our useful idiots.
To what extent do you think the whole political class is guilty here? The Tories have been at pains to point out that they commissioned the independent Jay inquiry, which I guess was a step towards this second inquiry by Baroness Casey. It was Sajid Javid who was able, as an Asian man, obviously distinguished former cabinet minister, to insist that ethnicities were recorded when these incidents were reported to the authorities. But even though he insisted that, and he insisted on it publicly, and no one could touch him and call him racist, obviously, Baroness Casey's report says that in 2/3 of the cases, ethnicity still wasn't recorded. So it's only in terms of, as I carefully worded the introduction, on the available data, these ghastly crimes were carried out disproportionately by Pakistani men, but we've only got 1/3 of the data.
Yeah, but Liam, come on. We've got eyes, haven't we? Look at the police mugshots for every grooming gangs, rape gangs case that comes to court in this country. What do you see?
I completely agree with you. And I'm having a go at the Tories here in essence, because, okay, Javid did introduce that. And I remember I talked to him a lot before he did that. I know him quite well, as you know.
Yes.
And it was a bit of a political risk for him to do it. But in the end, no one could touch him because, he is an Asian man.
Well, he was more than that. He was born in Rochdale to a British Pakistani family.
Absolutely.
So he had impeccable credentials.
Yet still, even though he said that, and even though he wanted that publicly, the civil servants, whoever it was, with the Tories overseeing them, still didn't record the ethnicities in 2/3 of the case.
Not only that, Liam,
Crazy.
let's not forget, David Lammy, now Foreign Secretary, was horrible about Sajid Javid for doing that, for taking that vital step. So it's these Labour people. Look, when the history of this really dreadful era, the brutality, unbelievable scandal of this tens of thousands, we know, possibly 100,000 white British girls, predominantly white British girls, raped, trafficked, tortured, you name it, veins injected with heroin, the kind of sexual abuse you can hardly imagine. Yeah. When the history comes to be written, no political party is going to come out looking clever, but it has to be said that, Kemi Badenoch did extremely well this week. I thought by far her best performance in the Commons.
Finally off the leash.
Really brilliant, absolute tigress.
I agree.
I loved that.
Didn't look at her notes at all, just straight down the lens, as we say in television.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and that was great because, we're not looking down at the notes, no casual elbow on the dispatch box, a bit kind of like relaxed. No, she was absolutely Kemi unleashed. But I have to say that Suela Bravman, who we know was Home Secretary, and obviously said some very, very combative things about British Pakistanis. Again, no coincidence. We see another Conservative of different ethnicity, non-white ethnicity, who's been able to speak out more boldly. She was criticised heavily by the press regulator, IPSO, for saying it was predominantly British Pakistani men. She's now demanding an official apology. Let me just explain to listeners, because I'm a bit of a Talmudic scholar on this subject. I know. What a subject to be good on.
You need to get out more, love.
I don't need to get out more. Okay, so what they do, the Emily Maitlis class, when she attacked Rupert Lowe the other week, right, with her superb sneering.
She's become a hyphenated adjective.
Yes, she said, oh, you're a racist.
Yeah, unbelievably crass thing to do.
Unbelievably crass to Rupert Lowe.
I thought he kept his cool, actually, really well.
He did. He was excellent. He's put his own money and raised a huge amount of money for a national child rape inquiry. But the data she's using, the reason it's flaky is because if you just look at paedophiles, right? Paedophiles, men attracted and who abuse children, then that is predominantly white men, okay? But this crime is not paedophilia. They are not attracted specifically to children. They are trafficking young girls. And that is called CSE, child sexual exploitation. And that is overwhelmingly Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin. And we have to face it, Liam. We have to face it that in that culture or some of those cultures, we are looking at men who think it's perfectly normal to have sex with and to marry pretty young children. In Iraq, they are trying now to legalize marriage to 9-year-old girls. And let me refer you back to, in January 2020, a lady called Shaista Gohir of the Muslim Women's Network told Newsnight, honestly, Pakistan is one of the worst countries in the world to be a woman. And what I would say to you is, if we import Pakistan's misogynistic attitudes into parts of the United Kingdom, and these guys run straight into vulnerable young white girls, usually working class, often in care, not always with any protective family behind them, and if they look, a bit up for it, easy meat, because to people from very modest or, tribal cultures, you do have a recipe for sexual abuse. And a question I want answering by this national inquiry, I have no hopes that they'll do it because it's too excruciating for Labour, which has really nailed its colours to the Muslim mast. We've seen women like Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, abasing herself in a room full of Muslim men. She needs their votes. Her seat is under threat. Jess Phillips, I think she's about 695 majority of votes. Absolutely astonishing.
And these guys voted against a national inquiry.
They don't want a national inquiry.
3 times they voted against a national inquiry.
Yeah, well, Pakistani rapists won't vote for you, Liam, if you have a national inquiry. Forgive my crudeness, but honestly, it has always been about votes for girls. It is the most disgusting transaction you could imagine, right? And however pious, they all sit there looking like, sort of like a primary school teachers on a kind of school outing. What they're up to is pretty despicable. And I hope, maybe not this inquiry, I hope in my lifetime we will see some justice for all those little girls.
Right, we're going to come back to that subject briefly after your interview, but let's just quickly talk about this abortion bill, and we cover the Middle East all the time. I just want to talk a little bit about the sort of economics of it, because it will be on lots of people's minds. So to the extent that I have a view, I've always been a sort of pro-choice kind of person when it comes to abortion. I've been comfortable with the 24-week legal limit, but no further, because, in many hospitals, you get incredible doctors trying to save premature babies that are in the mid-20s in terms of gestation. And at the same time, we are aborting babies even older than that in some cases. And so I really worry about this no-term abortion provision. And I wonder where it's come from. And I worry also, and I'm sorry to sound chauvinistic about this, but as somebody that's grown up in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood, who lives in a very ethnic diverse neighborhood now, I worry about Asian women coming under pressure when they're very, very visibly pregnant if they're carrying a girl. I worry about that.
The UK is quite an outlier, having this 24-week limit. Most other European countries have far lower. The median time limit for abortion in Europe is 12 weeks, right? And that's, Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Latvia, Germany, Italy, Greece, all have a 12-week upper limit. France and Spain, slightly higher at 14 weeks. Sweden, Norway, edging up to 18 weeks. Only the Netherlands has the 24-week limit that we have.
And now we're going further.
Although in practice, Dutch doctors apply a 2-week margin of error. So theirs is 22. So I think that because of advances in medical science, over 20 years ago now, I spent a few days in a neonatal intensive care unit. I think I believe it was in the hospitals where certainly your Eilish was born, and it was wonderful, Liam. It was absolutely astonishing. It was a place
in East London, yeah.
Yes, it was a place of holiness and miracles. These tiny babies, the sort of size of a guinea pig, really, covered in a pelt of fine hair, tiny, little fists the size of cotton reels, clinging on to dear life. And it was very moving. And the degree of care of those doctors and nurses is absolutely humbling. And they are, as you say, Liam, they are now saving almost 50% of 24-week gestation babies will live, right?
Yeah.
So we are now, I don't think we can go on having a 24-week limit. I'd like to see it coming down nearer to the French sort of 14.
But it's going in the other direction. In the States, obviously it's not legal in lots of US states, increasingly not legal in various states under Trump. But in the states where it is legal in the US, I think there's 25 of them or something, it's 24 weeks. And so how unique is the UK going to be if we have no term on pregnancies that women terminate themselves?
Well, it's extremely dangerous. It's dangerous for any woman who takes a late abortion pill because she'll have to give birth and the baby will be born dead, probably, but you never know. So that's absolutely grotesque. And when I was pregnant with my second child and they were advising me that I might need to have a late abortion, and I asked the young woman gynecologist, what would that be like at 21 weeks? And I've never forgotten what she said, Liam. She said, horrible for all concerned. Horrible for the baby, horrible for the mum, horrible for the medical staff. So it's absolutely horrible, and it's something that should be avoided. You know, I've had a couple of friends where there's been something extremely wrong with the baby, that mentor termination was a compassionate thing to do. And I am absolutely pro-choice. I've accompanied two very dear friends to abortions, and that felt absolutely right at the time, and that was the right decision. Because I think all these people who are anti-abortion, and you just think, well, you know, you try bringing a baby into the world and you've got no resources and whatever. But this now is taking us on a very dark path. There's a very good clergyman I follow on social media, Fergus Butler Galley, and he wrote this week, I was not expected to survive birth. My parents bought the teddy I was due to be buried with. It's very hard knowing this, as well as many other cases I've encountered in my parish, not to view the vote in the House of Commons as an act of acute moral evil. Now, I believe that, and I think it's these Labour women predominantly who've driven it, and I think they are militant secularists, Liam. I don't think they care about whether old people are put to death or babies are put to death. It's all about the rights of the woman, which obviously I'm a woman. I champion women's rights. But absolutely, the baby, a 7 months gestation baby, has rights, right? It's alive. The lungs form the last, but they are fully functioning, right? I mean, if you've got a woman who's 27 weeks pregnant and you perform a C-section, that baby will be alive. The notion, it is infanticide. What else is it?
Crikey, I couldn't agree more, Allison. But look, let's leave that debate there for now. I'm going to do the economic fallout from the Middle East in one sentence before we move on.
You can sum it up. Go on. Bang.
Right, here it is. On a lighter note, let's do some geopolitics.
Sorry.
On a lighter note.
Sorry, listeners. Sorry.
The oil price, it's plunged from $80 a barrel at the start of the year, roughly, to below $60 a barrel by May, and yet now it's careening back up to $80 a barrel. And the lower oil price was a chink of light, certainly for energy importing economies like the UK. It was a chink of light because lower oil price, less inflationary pressure, you can lower interest rates, you can get the economy moving. And, you know, obviously the human fallout, as we've said, in the Middle East is absolutely ghastly, but there is economic fallout too. And the economic fallout will help to drive the Western world, and particularly America's response to this, how quickly it wants it over, which will have an impact. But this economic fallout really could not have come at a worse time. And it's going to seriously complicate the Bank of England's ability to lower interest rates and Rachel from Accounts' ability to manage our public finances. There you go, a long sentence, but I've done it.
We have a very special guest this week. Born in Rotherham in 1985, Sammy Woodhouse was a bright, bubbly little girl who loved dancing until she was groomed and raped over a period of years by Arshid Hussain, one of 3 Pakistani brothers who raped and trafficked over 50 young girls. Ash, as he was known, used the young Sammy as an accomplice on his robberies and drug deals. At one point, Sammy's father tried to rescue her, but police threatened him with arrest rather than his daughter's rapist. Sammy fell pregnant at 14 and had her son, James. She was the first Pakistani rape gang survivor to go public. She exposed the child sex exploitation scandal in her hometown when she spoke to the Great Chimes journalist Andrew Norfolk in 2013. By bravely waiving her anonymity, Sammy took the lid off hundreds of cases of child sexual exploitation in South Yorkshire and prompted the Alexis J report, which identified at least 1,400 victims in Rotherham alone. In 2018, Sammy published her book, Just a Child, Britain's Biggest Child Abuse Scandal Exposed. It contains scarcely believable stories about the ordeal she and thousands of British girls were exposed to. Sammy has since channeled her experience to become a passionate and highly effective campaigner and media performer, speaking out against child sexual exploitation. She's actively supported pardoning child sexual abuse victims for crimes which, unbelievably, they were coerced into committing and which are still against their names. Sammy Woodhouse is now a member of Rupert Lowe's crowd-funded national inquiry into the rape gangs. I began by asking her, what's her reaction to this Louise Casey report?
Well, you know, what's in the report is what I've known for a very long time and what we've been publicly telling everyone for a very long time. So nothing comes as a shock to me. But I think that over the years, even though there's been all that evidence there, it seems that we need these reminders from these reports to remind the public and the government about what's been going on. It makes me sick at times because you have these politicians, you know, they read out this report pretending to be shocked and, you know, disgusted when the truth is they've known for years. They know exactly what's been going on, not just to Mailing, but right across the country.
Yes, Labour didn't want a national inquiry. Keir Starmer said that those of us were calling for a national inquiry into the rape gangs were far right, jumping on a bandwagon. How did you feel about that, Sammy?
Well, I'm not far right and I'm not jumping on a bandwagon. He's just a coward. I'm not. You know, at the end of the day, we're talking about children being groomed, abused, raped, tortured, trafficked, murdered, impregnated, criminalised. You know, we're talking about the most heinous crimes that could ever happen. And he wants to just throw, you know, these stupid comments in that we're far right and racist. It's absolutely disgusting. I don't think he should be Prime Minister. And, you know, people are asking me, do you want an apology from him? Well, no, I don't want an apology. I want a resignation. All these politicians that voted no to an inquiry should not be politicians. It's absolutely disgusting that they still are. And, you know, I think they've just shown their true colours.
When Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, gave a statement in Parliament on Monday about the Casey report, on the Labour front bench, all besides her were Angela Rayner, who we'd seen photographed basically bowing down before Muslim men in her constituency. Jess Phillips, her constituency, also heavily influenced by the Muslim vote. Jess, who claims to have done so much for the survivors, but then only a few months ago said no need for a national inquiry. Sammy, as a woman now and as someone who as a little girl put through the most horrific ordeal, we'll talk about some of that later. How do you feel about powerful women like them sitting there doing a U-turn and pretending there's nothing to see here?
I think the cowards. Now, Jess Phillips, for example, I've worked with Jess for many years because I've been an activist for 13 years. I've worked with a lot of politicians. And Jess was actually one of them that supported me the most before she got into power. Now, at the last election, I was asked by Labour and by Conservative for my endorsement, which I considered it and I decided not to. And then I very publicly voted reform. I then went on to work with Tommy Robinson, who was exposing the exploitation of children. And then I covered the riots and the political arrests. So what I saw from people such as Jess Phillips, once upon a time, thought I was great and how amazing I was. And then the moment that I will play ball with them, they switched on me. And now none of them even want a conversation with me. So what I'm seeing is that the only thing they care about is their reputation and votes. Yeah. So I don't trust them. Out of all the politicians that I've worked with over 13 years, there's only one politician that I've got respect for, and that is MP Rupert Lowe. Now, Rupert came to my attention when Elon Musk was talking about this, I think back in January. He's no longer with Reform, but what he did was go out there, talk truth. He didn't back down from anyone, and he went and raised over £600,000 to do his own inquiry because nobody else would. So that's how he's gained my respect, and I'll continue to work with him as well.
I know you are working with Rupert Lowe on this national inquiry, which obviously has been influential in keeping the pressure up, and there is some funding for that. Now, is that still going to go ahead, given that the government said they'll have a national inquiry? And if it goes ahead, what is the aim of keeping it going?
Oh, definitely. I mean, look, this announcement that has been made, I don't trust him. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. Now, I have campaigned to get a national inquiry done. I've got no problem with that, as long as it's done properly. Now, what our government have a habit of doing is not doing things properly. Now, I think what they're going to do is they're going to pick a few towns, probably about 5, like it's been announced not so long ago, and they'll investigate that and then just feed it up to a national level. Every single council and police force in this country needs an investigation, and I'm not going to rest until it's done. Right? Because all they keep doing is just repeating. I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. These things to focus on a couple of towns. The truth comes out. Nobody's ever held responsible for it. So I don't just want people investigated. I want them named. I want them charged. I mean, in my case, if you look at me for an example, I've been very, very fortunate to get where I have. My perpetrator was in prison for 35 years. Yeah. I sued him when I think it was about 16 for a car offence. I sued Rotherham Council and won. I sued South Yorkshire Police and won. I had to fight for the criminal injuries, but I eventually exposed them and won it. So, I've probably got the most amount of justice that I'm ever going to get. However, there's no professionals being held to account. Now, if you look at some of the children, the other boys and girls right across the country, and in Rotherham as well, they've never had any of that. They've got no criminal justice, no compensation, no recognition from the police forces, from the council. So, we've got a lot of work to do. But I think with us on the rape gang inquiry that we're doing with Rupert Lowe, so, for example, we are supporting survivors. We are, helping them access into services. We are going to be helping them sort criminal investigations, take legal action against perpetrators, professionals or agencies, reform on policy and law change. We're basically doing as much as we possibly can. Now, we also know that we don't have legal powers to go in there and get the files. We know that, but we're trying to do what we can whilst the government actually do their jobs.
So Dennis McShane, who was Labour MP for Rotherham, famously said he had backed off from confronting the Muslim community in the town over those allegations of organised rapes of girls by predominantly Pakistani gangs. And Dennis McShane said, perhaps as a true Guardian reader and liberal lefty, I suppose I didn't want to raise that too hard. I think there was a culture of not wanting to rock the multicultural community boat. Now, Louise Casey, Sammy, in this report does indeed hone in on cultural sensitivities, fear of damaging community cohesion, shying away. Indeed, in one report, the word Pakistani tipexed out, meaning that the authorities didn't want to point the finger at Pakistani Muslim men. I'm really interested, Sammy. Do you think your abuser, Rashid Hussain, Ash, as he is known in your excellent book. Do you think some of the men there were aware that being Pakistani gave them a kind of protected status? At one point, you call him untouchable.
Yeah, he was intouchable. They all was. And yes, and he knew that as well. And I remember actually him saying on occasions where I'll just play race card. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Now, if you actually look at my case, because so many people were scared of not only being called racist, but Islamophobic as well.
Yes.
Because the religion played a role in this, not just race. But in my own files, it shows that anti-racism coordinator was actually attending my meetings when I was being raped. So you've got a 14-year-old child, a 24-year-old Pakistani man that's known to all services at this time.
Yeah.
And, been in prison for all different kinds of crime, never for the sexual exploitation, but all different crimes. And they bring in an officer like that. Why on earth would you do that to a rather than counsel strategy safeguarding meeting? But yeah, we've got the evidence of that, so that's going to be published in the rape gang inquiry as well.
Sammy, let's just say this loudly for the readers. You, as a child, being raped, underage, had in meetings an anti-racism coordinator. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I've got the documentation still as well to prove it.
Now,
I was pregnant as well. I was 14 and pregnant.
Yes, we're gonna come to that. So you've got a unique insight, Sammy, in a way, and you've told me some fascinating things. You lived for a while with your abuser's family, his mother and siblings. Could you see, was there a different attitude of men like Ash to white girls like you, to Muslim girls and women, their family members? Was there a double life going on for men like Ash?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the women in his family, and they definitely came across as strong, feisty women. Definitely, I met his mum. I mean, his mum didn't speak any English, so it was difficult to kind of speak. When she spoke, it had to be translated. But his sisters, I knew, and there was very strong women. However, it was made very clear that the men was, above the women, and that the women was there to, well, I suppose, cook, clean and raise children. So, but we was definitely looked at differently because we wasn't Muslim as well. Now, I know that this wasn't just happening to white children. I mean, I'll just focus on both for a second. I know that there was different races of children being exploited. And of course, what we have to remember is majority of the population of people involved in were white. So of course, when 1400 comes in, it was of white children. But yeah, they definitely looked at us differently.
Because you weren't Muslim?
Yeah. I mean, some of the victims have actually gone on to marry them and they've had to convert. So some victims never got out of this.
There was a famous trial, actually, where one of the young lads who was being done for rape, and his lawyer said he'd been taught that white girls were a bit like chewing gum stuck on the road. That's always stayed with me. So do you think that there is a sort of a contemptuous attitude, do you think, for that white girls are easy, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. We're viewed as white whores, white sluts. We are viewed very differently to Muslim women.
You got pregnant at 14, Sammy, and this is one of the many things I'll read this out. But social services knew that the father of the child was a 24-year-old Pakistani male. And in your file, it said, Sammy is not making any complaint regarding Ash. In fact, she is happy with the relationship. There does not appear to be a role for social services at this time. Now, sex with the child is illegal in this country. Having spoken, Sammy, to hundreds of other girls who went through what you went through, do you think that being white and working class meant that the powers that be didn't take the abuse as seriously as if it had been girls from another background?
I think it's definitely played a role. I mean, you don't hear about thousands of Pakistani girls being targeted by white men, do you?
No.
And I wonder how authorities would have treated that, I think, very differently. I think even the communities would have treated it differently. So, yeah, definitely. But like with me, I was never treated as a victim. I was treated as his mistress, as his girlfriend, and as though, the whole thing was consensual. And, pretty much all the children was treated like that. I mean, again, if you look at my files, he was invited to medical appointments. And, some professionals even said I was the one controlling him. In fact, Andrew Norfolk, before he passed away, when he helped me expose Robert, he actually went to see my foster care at the time, and I was really shocked she even spoke to it. But she turned around and said I was the one, that was abusing and controlling him. And when he asked her why, and she said, because he bought her everything she wanted. So,
but you describe yourself very movingly in Just a Child, your book, as you were very bubbly, loving, intelligent little girl, weren't you? You had absolutely no idea before this really evil thing descended on you. Now, Sammy, in the book, we see your rapist, ringing a police officer he knew with a Muslim name. There was a relative of his, Jahangir Akhtar, went on to be deputy leader of Rotherham Council. So we see police getting in touch with your abuser to tell him to get you home or they might have to turn up. Do you think, Sammy, the rape gangs, were working hand in glove with police and counsellors?
Yes, and I know that for a fact because I saw it. I saw police officers buy drugs from him. They came and passed information to him. Somebody was talking. In my case, the officer that you're referring to is called PC Hassan Ali. He actually came to my parents' house and asked me on a date, even though he was the police officer investigating my case. He's actually been killed now. He got killed, when he found out I was being investigated. Very strange case.
Do you think killed or died?
I personally think that he walked in front of the car. I've got no evidence of that, but, he was told just hours before that he was going to be investigated. And this was an officer that was right up to his neck in it. A lot of people named him. And then he got hit by a car. I was actually with a journalist when the police tried to cover that up from getting out. And the journalist turned around and said to South Yorkshire Police, this is very strange how you've not published this. I'm going to print because we think you're covering this up. And within moments, the police then revealed that he'd been killed. So even the police was trying to keep it quiet.
How high up in Rotherham Police, social services and counsellors do you think this scandal goes?
Well, it went right to the top and it actually went to the Home Office. And even my files show that the Home Office knew. And there was also people saying not to get me a court order because I needed a court order for him to stay away from it because they was in fear of upsetting him. So this is something that went all the way to the top. And, like I say, I've sued successfully.
Yeah.
So, there's been a lot of people in power that have been involved in this, and not just in Rotherham, but all the way across the UK as well. This is Britain's dirty dog secret.
How many of those men have been arrested, let alone jailed?
Yeah, good question. I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head because there's ongoing investigations. But when me and Andrew exposed Rotherham, we didn't just commission the Alexis J report. I opened the criminal investigation, which is now the biggest in our history, which is run by the National Crime Agency and by, it's called Operation Stovewood. And those cases are still ongoing. So the number is changing. But, I first started with the criminal investigations because I've worked with South Yorkshire Police and the National Crime Agency. And it opened August 2013. And they are still victims now waiting to go through the trials.
I just want to highlight for Planet Normal listeners this absolutely topsy-turvy world of injustice which you found yourself caught up in as a child. So you were in bed with your abuser, you were underage, and the police came in and they arrested you for possession of an offensive weapon but they didn't arrest him. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And you have a criminal record, Sammy.
I do. And unfortunately, I've just lost my fight to have it cleared. So as a child, I wasn't just being sexually exploited. I was also criminally exploited, as many children are. So what perpetrators do, they coerce and force children to commit crimes. And that could be, anything from dealing drugs, carrying weapons. So, for example, at 15 years old, and this was actually my birthday gift from him. I thought I was
Can I just say, listeners might like to know this because we'll talk about it. We were both panelists and guests, weren't we, on the Mark Steyn cruise when we did a rape gangs panel. And listeners, one of the many, many extraordinary things that Sammy told me was that the abuser had said, "Oh, your gift for your 15th birthday is going to be," what was it, your first armed robbery?
Yeah, so he took me on my first armed robbery for my 15th birthday. And what he was, so I'll tell you a little bit about that armed robbery. So my job was to sit in the back of the car, which was a stolen car, with the police scanners. So back then, the criminals used to carry the police scanners because they could hear, about the police. So my job was to listen to that while him and his friend went in with a gun and robbed the post office. Now, on this occasion, because this particular post office used to get robbed all the time, back then we didn't really have so much of CCTV. But somebody actually challenged him in there, so he didn't get to steal any money. Now, even though I wasn't the one that was going in there with a gun, I'm an accessory to that. So when I come forward in exposure of them, my legal team had to meet with the police and CPS and determine whether I was going to be charged for committing those crimes. Now, some of them the police already knew because I was arrested for them, but there was a lot that they didn't. And when I came forward, I just wanted to be honest about everything, that was going on. Now, they actually came to the conclusion that I could be arrested and charged for 102 years in prison if I was found guilty for the crimes that he was making me do. Now, my own solicitor said to me, "Sammy, don't come forward. Because you're going to go to prison for this. We'll just sue. Just take the money and just go and live your life," which I decided not to do that. For me, once I come to terms with what had happened to me, it took me a very long time. I knew that there were so many other people involved, and I just had to push forward on this. So I did risk going to prison for it. But the fact that I've been criminalised for some of these things and he never has. So even though he's in prison for 35 years for sexual exploitation, he's never been done for forcing me and the other children for committing crimes.
When we were on the cruise, we obviously talked a lot about things, and some of it's just absolutely surreal. It's like something out of Dickens' Oliver Twist, to be honest. But also I was often very, very upset and close to tears for you, but you're amazing, so tough. But I asked you when you first really clocked that you were the victim of this abuse, and I think you said 27. Is that right?
So at 27 years old is when I started to recognise that actually I was a survivor of exploitation. And I walked into a petrol station and I was reading a news report, and it wasn't a story as such, it was just a news report. And it said something along the lines of 54 girls had been befriended by 3 Asian brothers. Now, the wording of that was very important because I didn't know what exploitation was. So if it would have said 54 girls exploited, by these 3 men, but I knew how well known him and his brothers were as well. And that's when, it started to kind of just hit home, really. And I took the newspaper home and I read it, and I became very suicidal, and I was trying to make sense of everything. And when I was thinking, okay, so this happened to me, and then I started thinking about all the other girls as well, my friends, because they was being abused. I wasn't the only one. I was probably one of the latest ones to be abused. And I felt really stupid, why I'd not recognised this before. And then there was, about my family, about my son as well. This was his dad, his uncles. And my son was still at a young age. I think he was about 12 years old, and he'd had some contact with his dad before I recognised that I was a victim. But as a mum going through this with someone that was born through this, there was no advice for him. There was no training in place for professionals. Like, nobody knew what to do with my son. You know, they knew a little bit about what to do with me because I had a voice-in-law. I was recognised as a victim, but my son never was, which is why I've gone on to campaign for many things for children born from rape. But as well, what was really difficult, like even when I spoke out with Andrew Norfolk, I kept my identity hidden. I was known as Jessica.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
there was people in our community that knew who he was because obviously, you know, he was so well known in the town. So when my son was going to school, the other kids was telling him stuff. So even though I was keeping it, you know, kind of hiding a lot from home, and I didn't put the news on and all that kind of stuff in front of him, he was still kind of finding out things. And I think one of the worst things I did was not be honest with him all the time. I thought that by keeping things away from him was protecting him.
But it's an incredibly complex situation, isn't it? Because another thing you taught me, Sammy, is that a man rapes a woman in England and she becomes pregnant. Not only can he apply for contact of the child born from that rape, but he can also apply for a contact order to have access to that child's child as the biological grandfather. I mean, this is astonishing, isn't it?
It is. And in 2018, I did another exposure again with Andrew Norfolk at the Times. And Rotherham Council had invited my rapist into court proceedings to apply for contact or custody of my son. Now, bearing in mind, at this time, I was in prison for 35 years because he's been convicted now for what he did to me and children. Also, he's not on the birth certificate. Also, he's, you know, clearly a risk to me, my son, and other children. And he didn't even ask to be notified. So this is not all she had to say, saying, excuse me, I want contact with my son. This is professionals and services pushing that contact. Now, since 2018, I've been speaking to many people, children and mothers and carers. So I've been gathering a lot of information. This is happening to women all over the country, where professionals and social workers are contacting the paedophiles to get involved, even when they're not asking. It is absolute insanity that such dangerous people can have access to children, parental rights to children born from rape.
Yeah, well, I really feel strongly with that, and I'll support you in any campaign with that. I also read that for lots of the girls, trauma counselling was denied because it would compromise their evidence. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. That's been something that's been on for quite a while. And I remember when I was coming forward in things, and they offered me 6 sessions of therapy. And I was told to begin with, this could be used in court and everything, which for me, because usually when you come forward as a victim, they tell you not to speak about anything public, don't put anything, you know, on Facebook or social medias. If you speak about things in counselling, it's going to be used. They also asked for access to all my social medias, to my private messages and things like that. Now, I didn't care, you know, kind of if anything jeopardised my child, because I knew how strong my case was. And if you think about it, I spoke all around the world.
Yes.
You know, right up to the very day of this coming into court. So when I went to the 6 sessions, we didn't actually speak about anything to do with the abuse. We just spoke about things like the media. And I remember she was an Asian woman, Pakistani woman. And she said, you know, do you find it difficult speaking with me? And I said, no, why would I? And she said, oh, because I'm, you know, Pakistani. So, you know, they thought things like that would bother me, which it never did. But I asked the police officer, and I said, you know, will it be used against me or anything, or should I stop doing the therapy? And he said, no, you'll be fine. So, but, you know, if we kind of just touch on what I've just been talking about, things what can jeopardise trials. And I have very strong views on this, because when Andrew Norfolk published my story, he went to South Yorkshire Police for a right to reply. And they said, because of this, we're now going to start an investigation with Samantha. So if you run that story, you're going to jeopardise an investigation. So Andrew Norfolk said to me, okay, you've got a choice. What do you want us to do? Do you want us not to publish your story? Or do you want to go ahead and risk it? And I said, go ahead and risk it. So as I said, our story went worldwide, not just about him, but about the perpetrators. It took us 3 years to get into that courtroom. We had an excellent judge called Judge Sarah Wright. The trial goes ahead. And it didn't jeopardise anything whatsoever. So now what I feel is happening is this is another way to silence everybody from speaking out, because these trials now, they say, oh, well, this could jeopardise a trial and this could. Well, I'm living proof that done. If anything, Andrew kind of risked jeopardising it even more. And I'm not criticising him for that, because he did the right thing. But every journalist followed in his lead and nobody criticises him for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just my opinion on that.
I've seen some copies of WhatsApp messages in one of the Pakistani communities where you get the women and the men slagging off the white victims, saying, oh, she's a prostitute, whatever. What do you think can be done, Sammy, to make people, and obviously we're not saying everyone in those communities supports it, but you do get a lot of people having an us and them mentality. Do you think that these Pakistani, particularly the boys and the men, can be integrated into our society if they hold such misogynist views?
I think the biggest challenge in our country is changing the mindsets of people. And my rapist, I remember he used to sit there and tell me about the way he'd been fetched up with his religion, his culture, his family. And he told me that he was kind of always told that white people are separate. And that we are kind of viewed different. And I think, again, this comes around to the whole religion thing. If you're not Muslim, you're treated differently. And as well, I mean, if you look at the communities, if I speak about this in my book as well, you get certain areas where you might have Pakistani people in one area where there's more white people. And when I've spoke to people in the different communities, because I've worked with people from all different communities, I have worked with the Muslim community as well. And they say, well, we like to stick to our own so we feel safer. So I think that there has always been a problem, kind of coming together and living our way of life.
Are the Pakistani women aware of what some of the men are doing with white girls?
Yeah, of course they are. Yeah, of course they are. There wasn't many people that didn't know. It was no secret. It was very open for everyone to see. Again, I was living with his family, so they had 3 houses. So in the house I was staying at, there was me, him, his mum, and 2 sisters. And then his wife, because I found out afterwards he was married with children. She would be in the other house. There was his dad and brothers, etc. They all knew. Like I say, it was no secret.
And was that not seen as, that would be very scandalous, wouldn't it, in most families? Why would that be normalised?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I have no idea what they think. I suppose the only people that can answer that is themselves, but they didn't really have a problem with me. I think the only person in his family that kind of had a bit of a problem, didn't really speak to me, was his dad. Everybody else was okay, but again, before I recognised that I was a victim, my son actually went to stay with his family. So they knew about my son. We was co-parenting, if you like. So they knew about my son as well. So when they actually went public, when I exposed it, and they said, oh, we've got no idea who she is, well, they made themselves look pretty silly, really.
One of the many things you said that really shocked me was that the perpetrator was able to walk free and come and almost throw you over a balcony, grabbing you by the throat and terrorising you. Do you think people are aware that often that the rapists in these communities are back on the streets and able to be near the women that they've abused?
Yeah, they are starting to come out. That was actually my rapist that did that. But he's got one brother who got sentenced to 18 years. He's not even served half of his sentence and he's out. The other one, again, not even served half. He's been considered to move into an open prison, so he's going to be out soon. So these people come out to their community and they're just welcomed back into their community. It is one thing I've found about the Muslim community. They kind of really stick together. It doesn't matter kind of what's done. They will always stick together.
So there's no stigma that they've been found guilty of raping 54 girls. There's no stigma.
No, by some, I'm not saying by all, because as I say, I've worked with some and they've said, Sammy, this is absolutely disgusting. What's happened? We don't agree with this whatsoever. But everyone just turned a blind eye to it and accepted it. There's no one challenging them. They're just welcomed back in. And it's almost as if it's okay and it's accepted and that it's our fault because we're white clothes. And we're the ones that, encourage these men to do what they're doing. The blame is always on the victims and not on the perpetrators. So, and I'm not an expert in religion, but, people start and go down that hole as well. A lot of people say that it's allowed in their religion, so they don't see the wrongdoing in it. As soon as you reach puberty, then, you're considered a woman.
Yes, that the age of consent, and as it were, not all Muslim countries, but in Iraq, I think they're pushing for the age of consent to be 9. I'm just wondering, coming back to that, do you think that men who hold dual Pakistani citizenship, and absolutely astonishing listening to the Louise Casey report, Yvette Cooper basically admitting that men who have been guilty of child sexual abuse are still eligible for asylum, which I found just absolutely dumbfounding. Do you think there's a case for deportation, Sammy? Do you think that if they've been in our country and have abused scores of girls, do you think that there is a case for deporting Pakistani men?
I think they definitely should be. Whether that happens or not, we've seen over the years, haven't we, where I think it was a Rochdale case where some should have been deported and didn't. Of course, you have some that are being investigated and convicted, and before the trial, because they're getting bail, they're flying out there to Pakistan on their own. In fact, my rapist brother did that in our trial. But yeah, I think they should 100% be deported, definitely, no question. But I think we have a very weak government, and we have people still, and I think it's probably worse now than what it was back in my day as a child, that people don't want to upset the Pakistani Muslim community. Now, I don't care what race you are, what religion you are, what gender you are. If you are raping children, you should be prosecuted. And if you're not from this country, get them out.
Absolutely. Finally, we saw with the Casey report, one of the things she's highlighted is that, Home Office was releasing very dodgy data claiming to show children were more at risk from white men than Pakistanis. Of course, as Louise Casey's pointed out, is that they were taking very selective statistics, and that absolutely wasn't true. But that's been data trotted out by everybody, calling people, racist, Islamophobic and so on, but it's just not true. Do you have any trust now in British institutions that this national inquiry will, see justice finally for not obviously you've as you say, you've been tough, you've managed to make a very good, passionate life for yourself, but as we know, there's thousands of just bitterly damaged girls, young women now. Do you have any trust in British institutions to give them justice?
No. No, I don't. I don't think this inquiry is going to get us the justice that we need. There is a long, long way to go. I think they're just chucking this out there just to keep us quiet. Labour are going to be investigating Labour. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So, I don't trust them at all.
But with your inquiry, what do you hope your inquiry can do that's a bit different?
Well, what I want to do is put survivors at the forefront and not shy away from anything. Now, we're going to be working on different things, so we want to give survivors a professional platform to tell their stories, where we can name people for being involved. We're going to be helping with criminal investigations, bringing private prosecutions, helping them get involved in services, research, policy and law change. So we want to do a little bit of everything, but make sure that survivors are at the forefront. So I'm going to be leading a lot on this. You know, I'm a survivor myself. I've worked in the industry for 13 years. We've got a new member to the team. She's actually one of the Rotherham whistleblowers that helped me and Andrew Norfolk expose Rotherham. And she was also my support worker at the time. So she's called Nat. She's worked with children and families for 20 years. So she's someone I know, someone I trust. So, yeah, I'm very excited to have her on board the team because obviously, you know, we need somebody who's an expert in safeguarding and things.
Finally, I want to ask you, are there little bright, beautiful Sammy Woodhouses out there just right now, today, that this is happening to? And what would you say to her?
I would say that you're not alone and that there, unfortunately, is many of us out there that have been through this, that understand it, that will help support you, help you guide through in whatever direction in life that you want to go through, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Sammy Woodhouse, thank you for being a guest on Planet Normal.
Thank you.
Well, Allison, we've had well over 250 episodes of Planet Normal, many incredible guests. But I think that interview is right up there with the most memorable, the most important, the most shocking, the most moving. That will stay with me for a very long time. What a bright young woman. That's the first thing to say. What an incredibly articulate, courageous young woman. And what a tragedy befell her as a youngster. And it's great to hear her standing up for herself, making public her concerns. And I think you were exactly right in your introduction. As we heard there again, you mentioned Andrew Norfolk. That interview really was path-breaking back in 2013. And it was the beginning of the process by which our political and media class has been forced, kicking and screaming to confront the realities of this situation. And there's still a long way to go. We have to keep up the pressure. You've personally been at the forefront of this for a long time. You've taken brickbats. I'm proud of your role in this saga and the uncovering of these injustices. You know, a number of journalists have done really, really good work. And I'm so glad that this report has concluded the way it has. But I'm under no illusions that the pressure is going to have to be kept up here on Planet Normal, elsewhere. A lot of journalists are now engaged on social media to make sure that there is some kind of recognition of what happened. The perpetrators are brought to justice. And we do seriously consider, I agree with you and I agree with Sammy, we do have to seriously consider now the ultimate sanction of deporting people who are dual nationals, who are found guilty of these ghastly, ghastly offences.
Now it's on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We really learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal, and we've got some absolute crackers this week, including this one from Michael. Dear Alison and Liam, I'm writing this with a pounding heart and a bottle of gin on the table. Tears in my eyes, yes, but mostly rage. I've just staggered out of a meeting where we were told the school, our school, a sanctuary of decency and learning, a shining outpost in this frothing national madhouse, will be dead and buried in less than 3 weeks. Gone, obliterated, no ceremony, no mercy, just the cold steel of policy and the dead eye of bureaucrats who never once set foot in a classroom where a child looked up at you like you might be the only person in their life who cares. This school wasn't some polished playground for the elite. It was joy, grit, and something bordering on holy. A place where every person, from the head teacher to the person scrubbing the toilets, gave everything they had for the kids, every day, without fail. There was love in the corridors, real, messy, stubborn love, says Michael. And you can't tax that. But by God, they tried. This school survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, recessions, COVID, and now it's being strangled by a policy so blindly vindictive it would make Orwell vomit. Sure, VAT was the murder weapon, slapping 20% on education like it's a yacht or a bloody Rolex. But that was just the start. Fuel prices, national insurance hikes, economic strangulation, the whole grotesque circus rolled into town. Labour didn't just tax education, they hunted it down like a dog, hacked it to pieces with machetes, then mounted the head on a spike outside Westminster. A warning to all who dare think of giving their children a choice. You will bow to the state or you will be punished. This wasn't policy, this was a purge, says Michael. An execution on ideological grounds. They didn't care about the kids, the families, the futures. They wanted a scalp. And now they've got one. Well, they've got many, and it won't be the last. Let's take stock of the carnage just at our school, says Michael. 191 students, many in the middle of exams, have just weeks to find new schools. 80 staff thrown onto the scrap heap. These are the working people Labour crows about in every speech. Now they're lining up for redundancy checks funded by the taxpayer. One teacher on maternity leave now has no job. Her partner, also employed at the school, gone too. And what do we get in return? Just a government blinded by ideology and out of touch with the real cost of its decisions. They claim to care for working people, yet are happy to throw them into unemployment. They speak of fairness, yet tax education, something no civilised country would do. More students are flooding into a state system that's already bursting at the seams, while the government loses the VAT revenues it was drooling over in the first place. It's lunacy on stilts, says Michael, a zero-sum game where everyone loses forever. This is not just policy failure, it is moral failure, a deranged assault on independence, on dignity, on the very idea that a family might dream of something better for their child. The real cost isn't in Treasury reports. It's in the wreckage of lives, the trauma of our students, the panic of staff now staring down the barrel of rent, loan repayments, and empty bank accounts. So I'm begging you, continue to shine a light on this, not just on our school, but on the dozens more quietly bleeding out across our country, while this ideological meat grinder rolls on. I'm going to use every last ounce of fire in my veins between now and the next election to help drag these Labour swine out of power and into the gutter where they belong. Reform UK, God help me, are the only ones even pretending to understand that supporting parental choice isn't a crime. Tax incentives for going private. At this point, it sounds like divine intervention. Oh, and I didn't mention I was the trade union rep for the school. Labour have lost me forever. Yours in rage, Michael. Well, Michael, reading as a former teacher, reading that email, any child who has someone who writes so brilliantly was fortunate indeed.
What an incredible email. I tell you what, you'd have to be on good form, Allison, to pen something so coherent and beautifully constructed.
Beautifully, I know.
That is a serious talent in our midst. Wow. And a subject close to my heart, of course, being the governor of 2 independent schools. So I'm seeing this up close and personal. This one is from Down Under co-pilot, indeed from New Zealand. This is Debbie. Dear Allison and Liam, I listen from the South Island of New Zealand and I love your podcast. It's my compulsory listening and I put it on with headphones while I'm on my treadmill. My husband's from South Wales, but he's lived here in New Zealand for over 40 years. And when he lived in the UK, he went against his family's wishes and voted Tory. He certainly votes for the right in New Zealand, thank goodness. That means we're not responsible for the complete and utter mess Labour's Jacinda Ardern left us in. She was our worst Prime Minister and nearly destroyed our country. And we get irritated when our UK relatives seem to idolise her. I don't know what lies they're fed by the mainstream media. Anyway, I've always loved the UK and went on my overseas experience over 57 years ago, lived in London, and it saddens me to see parts of it now. Allison, I love your British voice, and it's lovely to hear. Our New Zealand accent's turned into some kind of Kiwi Aussie drawl, says Debbie. Just really want to say you're my favourite podcasters and keep up the good work. It's the highlight of my week. Now I'm a retired 69-year-old. Fabulous email, Debbie, and don't fall off your treadmill. Your email has just been read out on Planet Normal. And hello from us to you over there in New Zealand. And this is Jessica. You jumped the gun on the podcast, she says, by suggesting the incoming cabinet at the next election. I came up with the following while my husband was chauffeuring me on the way up to Manchester when I was going to see Bruce Springsteen, said Jessica. So the Prime Minister in Jessica's fantasy cabinet is Douglas Murray. The Deputy Prime Minister is Matthew Syed, who is, of course, the extremely talented Times columnist. We should acknowledge that. Very, very brilliant author and broadcaster. Chancellor of the Exchequer, c'est moi.
Oh, yes.
Home Secretary Tim Stanley. It's clearly a Telegraph team. And the Culture Secretary is Lionel Shriver. Education Secretary is Kathleen Stock. Environment and Rural Affairs, Jeremy Clarkson. Minister for Women and Equalities, Janice Turner, another fellow columnist. Minister for Science, John Bell. Jessica says her dad chose that. John Bell, of course, is a very distinguished Oxford professor. Minister of Justice, Trevor Phillips, who I think does a fabulous job, by the way, on Sky News. Duchy of Lancaster, Nigel Farage. Well, he's not going to settle for that, Jessica. I think with Nigel, it's PM or nothing. Douglas Murray's going to have his work cut out. Business Secretary, that's to be confirmed, says Jessica. That guy you had on the podcast from Sunderland a while ago, she says, need to search through to find his name. I think she might mean Ben Houchen, who is, of course, the Tees Valley mayor, pretty much the most senior Conservative in power these days. Foreign Secretary, another friend of Planet Normal, David Frost. Chief Whip, here she goes, dominatrix. Yeah. Pointy boots at the ready, Alison Pearson, or you can be leader of the Commons co-pilot, you can take your pick. I think we need somebody like Allison, says Jessica, to keep everyone in line. Well, I can concur with that. Other positions still available. I can't wait, and we'll stop looking for a job abroad for a while in anticipation, says Jessica. Thanks both for continued weekly doses of common sense.
We had a lot of reaction to the email from PC Anon last week. What an amazing, honest and distressing email that was. And Jane says, Dear Alison and Liam, I listened to PC Anon's email with a mixture of great sadness and fury. What have we become? I come from a police family. Both my parents, my brother, my husband and I are former officers. When I was serving in the 70s and 80s, there was a real police presence on the streets and we knew the locals and they knew us. There was an esprit de corps on each shift, which was diminished as staffing was cut. When I started out, there would be 5 Panda cars and 4 or 5 foot patrols in the town. 12 years later, there were 2 Pandas and maybe 3 on foot. There was also an inquiry desk open 24/7. Now I can't remember the last time I saw a PC on patrol, not even in a car. We used to see a PCSO in our village, but she seems to have disappeared. The inquiry office, or help desk as it became, is closed. Senior officers have become politicised. Police and crime commissioners, don't get me started, says Jane, actually stand for election under the flag of a political party and then go on to expand their empire at enormous cost to the taxpayers. As for the College of Policing, 3 exclamation marks, as with all these unelected bodies, nobody knows who they are, but we can deduce that they are self-important entities who spend their time trying to justify their existence by jumping on the latest bandwagon. I can testify to that, Jane, with their non-crime hate incident. Makes my blood boil. Meanwhile, good, brave officers are hung out to dry for doing their job, and the rest hide in a cupboard. I've got a 17-year-old grandson and I used to think he would do well in the job, but under current circumstances, I would advise him to do anything but the police. How sad. Yours in despair, Jane.
And on that College of Policing bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal from another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reasoned views. Email of the week. It's your turn, Alison.
Well, they're all great emails, but Michael, for that fantastic account of the heartbreaking closure of your school, please do send us name and address in an email to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk, and please put mug winner in the subject heading and we'll send you a rare as rocking horse poo Planet Normal mug.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal, the madness of plunder comes back into view. Thanks as ever to our producers Cass Ho, James Hodgson, Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.